Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order. Thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. This story was written and produced by your host Ross Bliley, edited by Nikki Bliley. You can follow me on social media outlets Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find the podcast on multiple music streaming providers including Spotify, Amazon Music, and Audible. If you like what you hear and want to support my work, subscribe to the show on the Sports History Network. As a conversation starter, you can email me questions or leave feedback of the show at pigskintalespodcast@gmail.com. The soundtrack is provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. Before we get into the story, I have to mention newspapers.com. I use it for my research and I love it because it gives me so much interesting information I would have never found otherwise. If you visit sportshistorynetwork.com, we offer a free 1-week subscription as a trial. With a paid subscription, you'll be supporting the production of this podcast as well as the other shows. Once again, thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. Last time on the Pigskin Tales podcast, Red Grange and the Bears rolled to an 8-1 record in a second barnstorming tour that took them from Florida to California to Washington. At the end of the tour, Grange's manager, C.C. Pyle, presented Grange with his rookie paycheck. He had earned $50,000 plus an additional $75,000 in gate admission tickets. Later, he wrote in his autobiography that Charlie kept his word. Now I thought I could go on to make it $1 million. This time on the Pigskin Tales podcast, I will focus on Grange's life after football. Although he was an exciting person to watch on the football field, he also had a career as an actor and broadcaster. Grange's impact on pro football has had lasting effects. A person almost can't talk about the Chicago Bears without mentioning Red Grange. This is the last part of the series on Red Grange, so I want to thank you for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. On January 31st, 1926, the Bears played the Seattle All-Stars. Grange scored 2 touchdowns and had 99 rushing yards on 9 attempts, en route to a 34-0 domination. After the game, Grange, Pyle, and George Wilson, the All-American halfback for the University of Washington, donated $50 to a medical bill fund for Raleigh Corbett, an all-star for Seattle that broke his leg during the game. Wilson, too, injured his right leg trying to tackle Grange, but Corbett's injury was much worse. According to author Ira Morton from his autobiography on Red Grange, it was days after the barnstorming tour was done, Pyle approached George Halas and Dutch Sterneman about buying a stake in the Chicago Bears. This was a big controversy at the time because Pyle's failed negotiation with Halas's refusal resulted in a new team and a new extension of the league. According to a blog written by Hugh Wyatt in 2004, Pyle told Halas and Sterneman that he was the one that actually owned the contract signed by Grange, not Halas and the Chicago Bears. Pyle also demanded that Grange be paid a generous salary for being the team's go-to guy. In addition to the new salary for Grange, Pyle wanted to be a one-third owner of the Bears. In my opinion, I don't think Halas had much of a response to Pyle other than to say no. I think Pyle became upset and stormed out of the meeting, saying to Halas that he would regret his decision later. According to Wyatt, Pyle's rejection by Halas was taken to the NFL owners' winter meeting discussing the 1926 season. At the meeting, Pyle argued that he owned the rights to Grange's contract that he signed in October of 1925. In addition to proving that he owned Grange's contract outright, he wanted to start an NFL franchise of his own in New York, specifically within Yankee Stadium. A lot of the owners scoffed and laughed hysterically. As the owners scoffed and laughed hysterically at the idea of a professional sports promoter owning an NFL franchise in the largest city in the United States, Pyle yelled above the laughter that if the league doesn't honor their request, then he would start a rival league of his own. The chatter and laughter then came to a complete halt. New York Giants owner Tim Mara spoke up after the chatter and laughter subsided. He spoke directly to Pyle and talked about his financial struggles with a pro football team in New York. He said that he agreed with Pyle that Grange's appearance in an exhibition game at the Polo Grounds saved the franchise. He then asked for a compromise. This is a perfect time for a quick break. At the Sports History Network, we're all about the sports yesteryear, and so we're pleased to introduce you to Row 1, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings sports history to life. The Row 1 gallery features over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, and advertisements in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. Any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. It's your choice. In the Row 1 shop, you can pick from thousands of unique items that feature retro and historical backgrounds dating back to 1876. We have everything from clothing to phone cases to mugs, even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 for access to the full Row 1 catalog. When you buy from the gallery today, you can instantly save 15% on your purchase. All you have to do is enter the code SHN15 and your discount will be applied. That's SHN15. That's it. Simple. Save 15% off all your prints in the Row 1 gallery. Just go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. And don't forget to check out all the podcasts on the Sports History Network. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this football season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. With Thrive, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 out of the 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Thrive has over $140,000 guaranteed in prizes for the NFL in Week 1. Thrive's featured contest is $20 to enter, and first place takes home a cool $20,000. When you sign up today, use the promo code SHN and you'll get a 100% instant first deposit match, up to $100. If you go through the Sports History Network website, sportshistorynetwork.com/thrive, you don't even need to enter the promo code. you automatically get the deposit bonus. Download the Thrive Fantasy app on the App Store or Play Store now. You can play online at thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop up today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. After we've paid some bills, we're now back to the story. Thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. Mara explained that while Grange was the main attraction and that Pyle wanted his own NFL franchise in New York, he suggested that Pyle be given a franchise in Brooklyn, thinking that Brooklyn is still part of New York. The other owners looked around at each other and agreed with Mara that Pyle could have his franchise in a suburb of New York because they knew the impact of Grange's appearance. Pyle probably chose not to respond right away. Instead, he more than likely said something to the effect that he was thankful to the league's owners for inviting him to the meeting and being able to prove that he owned the rights to Grange's contract outright. He also probably said that, upon consideration for the franchise in Brooklyn, that he is going to reject that offer put forth by the league. He is going to formally start his own pro football league and call it the American Football League. His franchise was going to be the New York Yankees, and they will be playing their home games at Yankee Stadium. Before the meeting took place, Pyle had already rented Yankee Stadium. He just wanted to formally prove to the other NFL owners that he had the sole rights to Grange's contract, not George Halas and the Chicago Bears. The new American Football League started on September 26, 1926. Red Grange was part of C.C. Pyle's New York Yankees. Meanwhile, NFL President Joe Carr started their 7th season on September 19, 1926. How did everyone do? The standings were noted in the Pro Football Researcher's blog in their 1997 Volume 19, Issue 1 of the Coffin Corner. Number 1 was Philadelphia Quakers, 8-2. Number 2, New York Yankees, 10-5. 3, Cleveland Panthers, 3-2. 4, Los Angeles Wilson Wildcats, 6-6. Chicago Bulls, 5-6. Number 6, Boston Bulldogs, 2-4. 7, Rock Island Independents, 2-6. 8, Brooklyn Horsemen, 1-3. Number 9, the Newark Bears, 0-3. Dr. Harry March wrote a short essay to end the Coffin Corner publication issued in 1997. He says, "Weather is the worst foe of professional football as it is to all outdoor sports. There were 5 rainy Sundays in the 7 booked in New York that season. The tax reports to the U.S. government showed how much the Pyle team, which he called the Yankees, were taking in. One could easily figure out how fast they were being sunk. The Giant team was losing too, as we had to increase many salaries and pay new men much more than they were worth, as players were, for once, very scarce. The American League, which is what Pyle called his outlaw organization, never had one winning day for all 9 of his teams. The losses must have been enormous. Many players never were paid in full. It was a 3-month losing streak for cash and carry, and it continued until his Bunyan Derby. From Los Angeles to New York and back, and his sporting finis. Through it all, Grange retained the respect and affection of the National Leaguers, and this included managers, owners, and players. In 1927, Pyle approached Mr. Mara voiced his regrets, confessed defeat, and asked forgiveness. He was permitted a franchise which he might have had earlier had he been less aggressive and more tactful. He played 2 more seasons in the league, the last without Grange, whose contract with him had expired. Then he withdrew his cross-country running races and his foreign female tennis players, a sadder, wiser, and poorer man. One man, Timothy Mara, stood between the dictatorship of professional football by C.C. Pyle and the present orderly procedure which has built up a fine league of national success. President Carr was firm and tactful after war was declared, and Chris O'Brien of the Chicago Cardinals stuck to the old league when every possible financial inducement was made to have him desert to the new outlaws. His loyalty and stability under the stress, in my opinion, has never been thoroughly appreciated by the team owners or by the public. On October 27, 1927, the Yankees were shut out by the Bears 12-0. According to the Decatur Daily Review in Decatur, Illinois, Red Grange was carried off the field due to a really bad injury. The newspaper article says that Grange went to catch a pass thrown by Eddie Tryon, and George Trafton, the Bears center, pulled down Grange and his cleat became stuck in the grass. Grange's knee twisted the wrong way and severely pulled a tendon. As soon as the whistle blew, players such as Trafton felt so bad for the injury that they physically carried him off the field. Grange told the press after the game that he'll be taking it easy for the next week and hopefully will be ready to play against the Green Bay Packers. Grange wrote in his autobiography with Ira Morton that after the injury to his knee, he felt like he was just another halfback. The injury had affected his speed and agility, but he was still able to play the rest of his career. Grange also noted that he thought he could play through the rest of the season on a bum knee. He says, "At the young age of 24, I refused to believe that I couldn't bounce back to my old form. I was positive I could play myself back into shape. But those additional games only served to further aggravate my condition, and when the tour was ended, it became apparent that I had done irreparable damage to the knee. For the first time since I was hurt, nearly 4 months before, I began worrying over the possibility that I might be through as a football player." Four months after his injury, the Yankees played the Cardinals and won 20-6. Grange's knee held up, but he still wasn't the same player he was in the past. When Grange's contract was officially done in 1928, Grange did not renew his contract. He felt that his knee injury was too risky to continue, so he sat out the entire 1928 season. He returned to the Bears in 1929 and played 5 more seasons before officially retiring in 1934. When Red officially retired, Halas offered him a coaching job with the Bears. It was reported in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa Gazette on June 20th, 1935, that Red Grange has accepted a backfield coaching position with the Chicago Bears. He was offered the position of head coach first, but refused because of inexperience in the field of instruction. He said he wanted more experience in instruction before assuming more responsibility. Grange coached for the Bears for 2 seasons before retiring for good from football. Gary Rainmuth of the Chicago Tribune wrote a nice article about Red that was published on January 29, 1991, titled Red Grange, Greatness and Humility. In an excerpt from his article, he writes about Grange's life after his football playing days. He writes, in 1937, Grange underwent an emergency operation on his bladder and retired from the game. Then he owned a Chicago nightclub on Sheridan Road, was a sales manager of a large bottling company, sold insurance, and was a TV radio sportscaster for 10 years. In 1978, at a gathering of old friends and teammates in Glen Ellen, Grange was asked to speak. "Hell, I'm not that great," he said. "I'm just an ordinary guy." The truth is that until he retired with his wife to Indian Lake Estates, Florida, some 40 years ago, there was little that wasn't quite extraordinary about the life of Harold Red Grange. Harold Edward Red Grange passed away on January 28, 1991, at the age of 87. He was a modest player that played with passion and love of the game. From an early age, he was someone that had the gift of speed and agility. Combined with size and strength, Grange was an all-pro halfback twice in his pro career. He played in 96 career games, scoring 21 total touchdowns. ProFootballReference.com shows that he played 8 seasons in the league. The one season that didn't get recorded was when he played in the American Football League under C.C. Pyle and the New York Yankees. While Red doesn't have the huge numbers you would expect from a guy that was so pivotal to getting the NFL seen as a popular sport, he was a guy that was famous for leaving would-be tacklers in a cloud of dust 80 yards behind him. He was the first athlete to get paid to play football professionally. He was a charter member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963 and was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1951. Without Grange making the decision to play for Hallis and the Bears in 1925, the NFL may still be seen as a beer league instead of the most popular sport in America. Thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. This story was written and produced by your host, Ross Bliley, edited by Nikki Bliley. If you like what you hear and want to support my work, subscribe to the show on the Sports History Network. As a conversation starter, you can email me questions or leave feedback of the show at pigskinTalesPodcast@gmail.com. The soundtrack is provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io. Once again, thanks for listening to the Pigskin Tales podcast. We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.